when I reached out about asking people like, what's a topic that you've heard of that you're interested in learning more about, a lot of people said organizational network analysis. So, I think there's a lot of info out there about what it is, but it may also be quite new to people. So I'm really excited to be chatting about this topic, and also have Sunil present on the actual, him doing it, and him having a case study on that. So to get started here. So traditionally, when we think of organizations, whether you're in HR and you're not, you've likely seen an org chart or heard of it before. And really what an org chart is, it's a chart that reflects the structure of your organization. It's often in boxes and lines, and it kind of shows the hierarchy and the relationships that exist within your organization. But often, we know that organizations are networks and people collaborate with one another from different departments. And a lot of times we're not able to actually visualize that. So network analysis actually reveals information not visible through these traditional hierarchies. So it visualizes people's, the way that communication, information, and decisions flow within the organization, specifically using communication data between employees. And so that may be email, Slack, video conferencing, things like that. And again, Sunil will talk more about that. But it takes all that information and maps it to a visual way that you can actually see how are people collaborating and sharing information within your organization. And this all kind of relates to this idea of social capital. And I'm sure we all know here that the more people you know, the more likely information you're exposed to, the more opportunities you're exposed to. You may be able to answer questions quicker when you have more people in your network. So this idea of networks is really important, and it's tied to a lot of things around, a lot of ideas around innovation, performance, engagement, which I'll touch on. And so there's a lot of value and a lot of insights that you can drive from organizational network analysis. For example, if you look on the left here, that's a traditional organizational structure, and you see Cole and Kelly highlighted here on the left. You see that they're kind of at the at the bottom of the hierarchy within the organization, and you would maybe think that they don't play big parts within the organization. That being said, once you look onto the right, this organizational network, you can see that these people are actually highly networked. They collaborate with a lot of people from different parts of the organization. And they may actually be very influential. You may not think of them as leaders or influential employees, but they may actually be highly influential, and they may, be change leaders if you're thinking about change management and thinking about implementing change or new policies or anything like that. You want to be able to identify people who are highly networked and who have influence. And from looking at this org chart, you may not think that Cole and Kelly are those people, but looking at this network analysis, you see that they are highly networked. They collaborate with a lot of people, and they may actually, play a big part within the organization. So that's kind of a high-level overview of what organizational network analysis is and the type of insight that it can offer you within your organization. So, when you first look at it, it's just a bunch of networks and a bunch of lines with different people. So I wanted to give a better overview of how to interpret these organizational network analyses. So it starts with nodes. So these nodes are individual people, and these are lines of information or communication flow between employees. So as you can see on the diagram, there are these three different departments. Each person, each name has a node, and then these lines in between them. And they represent how information flows, whether it's unilaterally or bilaterally, and how close they are. So sometimes, someone may communicate on a weekly basis. Other times people are communicating on a daily basis. So the second point here is central nodes. So central nodes are employees who seem to know everyone and share lots of information and can influence quickly. So if you look at this network, you see Paul in blue. So he's a central node. He's someone who is highly networked, is networking with both marketing and manufacturing, and kind of keeps all the networks together. So he's likely getting a lot of information to him. So when you think about your organization, you may think of someone who maybe a manager or someone who's a bit more senior who's getting an influx of information to them. So they may end up becoming bottlenecks because a lot of times these people are the decision makers who are getting a lot of information and a lot of requests sent to them. And so they may become bottlenecks within your organization. So this type of network analysis is able to show you that Paul's a central node. He's getting a lot of information to him. He might be a bottleneck in the decision-making process. He also may be at risk of burnout if people are constantly coming to him with lots of information and requests. So again, these are kind of some insights you can start to identify and see when identifying Paul as a central node. Then on the opposite, there's these peripheral nodes. So these are employees who are loosely connected to a network and may sometimes actually be completely isolated. So again, this is kind of the opposite. These are people who are likely quite disengaged and aren't well connected within the organization. So for example, Carl in the red circle there, that's someone who's not really engaged within the organization. Information is flowing away from them. So if you were to do a network analysis like this, you'd actually be able to identify this and see, this person may not be engaged. Let's check in on them. Maybe they're fine with that. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're an untapped resource and we can utilize them better and help them embed them better into the network of the organization. And then the third point is just knowledge brokers. So these are employees who link poorly connected groups together. So within this diagram, I would say Paul is a knowledge broker as well. So he's bringing the finance team with the marketing team and the manufacturing team. So he's kind of acting as that link within the organization. So these are just some ways that you can, after doing a network analysis, you would start to identify these key people and the role that they play within the organization. So what I think is, great with our time right now is, so organizational network analysis insights have been used to solve key business questions for a very long time. But I always found that there was these confounding variables. So it does, again, use communication data, which, is just one piece of the puzzle. There's also the piece of the puzzle of human interaction. So I always found that O&A wasn't always truly reliable because it didn't incorporate the off-screen, off-email interactions, the people that you grab your coffee with, you have your smoke break with. Those people are also highly influential. So it didn't take into consideration that. Whereas now with COVID-19, everyone is just online. There is no human really interaction in person in the office. So the quality of the data, in my opinion, is a lot better and is a lot more reliable to solve some of the key business questions that have always, they've always been key business questions, but I think they've just been, they've just become more important as we've shifted over to remote work. So, what employees are at risk of burnout? That's a huge question right now. Which employees are engaged and which ones aren't? So again, in the office, you don't get to see everyone in the office. You can't see those, social cues, things like that. So, data is now, we're relying more on data to actually answer some of those questions. And then how do we also increase productivity and promote high performance? So I just wanted to go over one case study before I turn it over to Sunil, and it's improving sales performance at Ramco Systems. So I did include the source below if you'd like to, do a bit deeper dive on this. But the objective there was to better understand relationships between sales employee interactions with clients and their overall performance. So O&A was also used in this context to actually measure outbound communication. So not inbound, like internal communication between employees, but the communication flow with clients. So the initial information showed the strength of the relationship networks of each sales employee. And what they were able to find was that people who are highly, had higher numbers of relationships were actually had a higher performance rating. And through actually monitoring their email activity, they were able to identify that high performers sent on average around 350 emails to clients, whereas poor performers were sending out approximately 5. So leadership was able to then correlate strong sales results to strong relationships, and likewise poor sales results with poor relationships. And I think it's important to identify that with ONA, it's not about, there is this kind of creepiness factor that comes with it, but it's not about, monitoring employees and, making sure that they're monitoring how they're communicating with who and how much, but it's really to identify who needs help. So Ramco managers were able to spot poor performers early and intervene to provide training or coaching. So it's about, maybe the employees that were sending out 5 emails just didn't, maybe it's setting a new benchmark for how many emails you should be sending out, things like that. So it's being able to spot poor performance, spot low engagement, things like that, and actually, intervene and not necessarily kind of use it just as a monitoring system. So I'm going to now turn it over to Sunil to chat more about the technical stuff and how you can introduce ONA into your organization.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. My name is Sunil Meharia. Julia gave a brief introduction, so I'll skip that part. And Julia explained about the basic terminologies of ONA and give an overview of one of the use case where it can be used in marketing. My intent here is to take you through a more deeper dive in ONA concepts and see some of the technicalities or metrics that are currently used for ONA. So we'll start with what are the different data sources for ONA. So there are 2 possible ways to collect data for ONA using communication tools like email, Slack, or Zoom, which are called passive data collection methods, or directly through an online survey. Could be part of active ONA. So now metadata collected through the passive ONA identifies connection between employees and indicates how strong those connections are, analyzing the frequency and duration of those communications between different employees. Whereas active ONA is survey-based, asking questions in a survey such as, whom do you like to turn for a discussion, or whom do you typically go for work-related information? Next slide, please. So now next is, how do you understand and analyze your network? So in the graph here, what you have seen is I have drawn 2 at employee level and at community level. This was done using Node Excel. So employee level metrics provide insight about an employee's position within the organization. Often helping to identify important or central people, like what Julia mentioned earlier. Such high network employees are often influencers or bridge spanners. Coming to communities, so communities are informal, self-organizing group of people, sharing a particular practice or an interest in a specific knowledge area. Now, aggregate graph metrics such as network density can be used to systematically compute communities, indicating which communities are highly networked or which are sparse. So I have mentioned some of the metrics in one of the diagrams. Yeah, so we'll not go into those details. Yeah, next slide, please. Thanks. So I think one of the common trend now here in ONA is identifying those influential leaders or informal leaders in your network data. So how do you identify your informal leaders? We often ask who is the most important or central person in the team. Now, different centrality measures that we saw in our previous slide at employee level help us addressing in these questions. For example, we can see here that Jane is well connected and networked within her company. Jane also acts as a bridge between marketing and finance team. In the example here, you see that PageRank explains how important people are connected to other important people in the organization. This behaves in a similar way how Google lists its websites. Other metric like betweenness centrality measures the flow of information in the network. So in our previous slide, Julia was explaining about Paul, how he measures how he maintains the flow of information between marketing and finance. So there are more than 20 different ONA metrics that you can use to measure employee interaction within the network. Next slide, please, Julia. Thanks. So another concept in ONA is how you identify those informal communities and how it is helpful. Now, learning about a community, whether it is defined geographically or by a common interest, means knowing about community's cultures or its capabilities and assets, and also its needs and challenges. So I have shared an example of one of the largest community identified in the organization. So through different ONA metrics, you can analyze that employee in this community is not well connected, but it has a large number of influencers, almost like 14, so which is a high number. Now, tracking aggregate graph metrics over the time can determine the effectiveness of interactions within the community. So, for example, you would like to measure the success of your HR intervention in a community. So, for example, after a team of site or town hall, you would expect a total number of graphs, a total number of connections to grow, increasing the graph density. Next slide, please. So, so far in the presentation, we learned about ONA, some basic terminologies and technical metrics to analyze the data. Now we'll discuss some use cases of ONA for COVID-19. So starting with employee burnout, Julia covered a big piece of it. So ONA can help companies assess employee burnout risk by measuring percentage of communication outside work hours, percentage of unread messages or average response time, among others. This enables them to identify potential burnout scenarios and in a more proactive manner and implement mitigations where needed. Now, since most of us are working remotely, so I think employee isolation or disengagement is a big concern for most of the companies. So in COVID-19 crisis, almost everyone is working remotely, right? So sometimes we may feel disconnected, distracted, or somewhat disoriented. This can impact our productivity and engagement. Peripheral employees, like someone who is working in a very technical role from a remote location, could be at high risk. So in such cases, how you resolve that problem? So you would generally ask the manager to schedule more one-to-one meetings or more chit chats to prevent potential disconnect. Next slide, please, Julia, thanks. So we talk a lot about organization agility, and I think Sylvia also covered in her slides. In this situation, companies are updating their strategies, policies, and procedures to protect employees, customers, and operations. I think informal leaders influence their peers and speed change adoption in a significant manner. So there was a research where they found out that informal leaders have more than 40% greater impact than your formal leaders in reaching out to your employees. So now with your data, you would like to channel your communication through this informal influencers to have maximum impact. Our last use case is around remote hiring, which is common now or going to be common in post-COVID situation. So companies who are hiring or will hire remotely would be facing with a lot of challenges in terms of expectation to hit productivity. So informal leaders identified through ONA can be assigned as buddies or mentors for a fast transition. This will result in shorter time to productivity or low turnover and less disengagement. Yeah. So yeah. Any questions?